and we're applying it directly. Now, I'm on my headset. Can you hear me, Andrew?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
We're taking that learning and we're applying it directly to things that are happening in our real-time world. And so that's really, kind of where I come from when it comes to how we're going to train and interact with both students and at the college level and at the adult learning level. So that's my experience with the adult learning theory and how we apply it.
Good. All right. Well, yeah, Tony, I'm guessing that you and I don't hear as many ambulances as what Janet does.
I'm sorry about the fire trucks.
Yeah. The second question I'd written was, in what ways can we as instructors stimulate and direct our learners' self-activities? And somebody else had asked the question before we got started. Like last week, they sent me an email and said, how do we help our students really balance their activities in life and then apply what we're teaching to activities, like their family and their school and their work, and their ministry and their recreation? Because, I think as we engage, especially these adult learning students, it's so different than that 18-year-old who packs up their suitcase, they move to Chicago, and they go to school there, and their focus is on their education and, some of those other things. But many of our adult students are working full time. They have a family that they're, having to take care of. They're involved in a local church, and they're taking their studies. How do we help them understand ways to, balance those things, how to stay healthy in the midst of all of that? What are some of the ways that you've been able to help some of our students that way? So are you taking a Sabbath during the week sometime, Tony? Okay. Yeah, on Sunday if they aren't in ministry. It's a little more difficult if you are in ministry on Sunday. Good. I think that's probably one of the areas that I've struggled with the most throughout my years of teaching or being involved in ministry is getting that day off.
Yeah, and I can attest to that. I've tried to get days off for the last year to work on his dissertation, and it's something that doesn't. So yeah, it's hard. I think we're all really juggling a lot of different competing priorities in our work lives. Even as I'm watching the students that are here as a part of our work team, who are student workers, and their ability to juggle the workload and their school load as well. I'm noticing that with a couple of the workers that we have here, and really praying into this idea of what does it mean to have the quadrants, maybe even looking at Stephen Covey's book, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and helping students to understand that everything can't be in the urgent box. We need to operate out of box number 2, which is what's important. And I think that that's an important part of what we can communicate to students as well, is that just because something's urgent doesn't mean that it's important. So.
Man, though, at 50 years old, that's still a hard lesson to learn, isn't it? Because you have an awful lot of people telling you that their urgent item is really important.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's probably a good skill, for our students who are going into ministry to learn. It's amazing how many times as I reflect back on my years in church ministry, how, you know, somebody else, something's going on in their life and it's not a crisis, but they feel like it's critical to interrupt what we're doing or, to force that to be more important than what I'm doing with my family or those kind of things.
Right. I was on the phone with a student last week who was complaining about not being able to get her textbooks on time and a couple of other things, and I was as I was talking with her, she was driving kids home in a carpool. She had a Bible study she was running that evening. When she arrived home, while I was on the phone with her with the kids in the carpool, she had a neighbor who was at her door who needed something, and she just said to me, "I am not going to put any of this down." And I began to just pray for this student that she would figure out that she's not going to be able to do all of it all at once. That God doesn't call us to a life that is frantic, frenetic, and chaotic, all in the name of ministry. That we have to find a way to be able to say yes to the things that God calls us to, and no to the things that He is saying. There must be someone else in this person's life, or praying even for someone else in that person's life that can meet that need as well. So it's tough trying to say no when you feel like, man, this could be a ministry opportunity. But if we don't encourage our students to put their education first for a period in their lives, it'll be difficult for them to as well understand how to balance their lives once they get into their ministry workplace, because it won't get easier going into church life.
No way. Let's see what Randy has to say here too. Mm-hmm. Randy's words about giving some brief encouragements by email kind of segues us into this next one as well. Some specific ways that we can encourage and direct our students, and maybe help point them towards other resources so that they can continue to learn to do things for themselves, and whether that's for their school work, or whether it's pointing them to like a Covey book, or something like that. How do we help our students find more of these resources so that they'll be lifelong learners as they continue on and get done with school? Oh yeah, that's good, Tony. I like that idea that you are modeling that and explaining that to your students as well. That's good.
Yeah, even Randy's comment there saying, I send a letter at the beginning of each course telling students a bit about the time necessary to complete assignments in the course. That's true. Asking the question, are you able to commit to this for this time? I don't know about you, Andrew, but when I started my doctoral studies, one of the questions the advisor asked me was, okay, so I see this really full plate and all these great accomplishments, so tell me, what are you going to sacrifice in order to get 24 hours into your week to work on your doctoral studies? What are you going to sacrifice? That was a tough question to answer because everything seemed important to me.
My golf clubs haven't been out of the garage in 3 years, so that's one of the things that got sacrificed. Yeah, Randy, I think there have been some days that I would have been satisfied if I were burning the candle at both ends. I feel like I've been burning it at both ends and in the middle. It gets to be a mess at that point. Yeah, Tony, I know golf's overrated, but it was a hobby that I could enjoy. And I didn't have to find junior high kids to beat in basketball, so.
And the thing is that the students who are younger in our classes too don't necessarily have the emotional intelligence or the life experience, I should say, maybe, to know how to get through that. So I think what Tony's talking about, and even Randy, is when we model for them ways to be able to break down their lives into compartments or segments. I know, Andrew, when I was talking with Lydia, the worker in your LSP program, she was talking about how she didn't realize until she read the Gordon Smith book, Courage and Calling, she didn't realize that life really was comes in waves. It's like in segments. There's seasons in your life, is what Smith talks about. This is a season in your life, and you'll do this for this time period, and then you'll have another season, and God will call you into different areas of ministry over time, or different areas of service over time, and being open to that and realizing that this isn't a permanent situation, that we can certainly find ways to balance life and then take our learning and apply it in a way that's healthy for us. So
that's good. So have any of you pointed students towards other resources that are maybe outside of the, what's in the course shell to help students with other aspects of life? So whether, like Janet, you just mentioned that Courage and Calling book. Um, have there been other things that you've helped students find?
Yeah, I certainly have often pointed students toward the book on emotional intelligence and also the book on by Stephen Covey on time management. I'm not sure. I'll let Tony and Randy speak to what else they're bringing to the table, but those are um, mhm. Do more better. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Tony, can you get your mic open at all? Are you able to talk with us about that book?
You unmuted it, but I don't hear you, bud.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, if I had a magic wand that I could wave
Okay.
so that
And
everybody's
no.
tech problems would work, I wish I could do that. I've found as I've worked with some of our graduate students, I'm constantly amazed that we have grad students who already have maybe a PhD or an MD or a law degree, and then as they come into the seminary side of things, all of a sudden they're in a world that's so different. They thought they knew and loved Jesus, but all of a sudden we start using words like hermeneutics and soteriology and eschatology, and they don't really, have a strong foundation from their years of following Jesus in that. And so I found that many times for those students, I do, like Randy's saying, I need to find some additional books or articles or the, blogs, some of the social media things um, to help those students be able to kind of ramp up to where the course is at. And I think we see that in other areas, or we'll have students who are really passionate and they want to dig deeper, and that we're able to help them jump into that. Um, One of the things that I also try to encourage students as it relates to resources is to try to read things from a balanced perspective. If you are very much part of, say, the Gospel Coalition, and you're, lean that direction theologically, that you also take some time to read some perspective from some folks who aren't 5 point Calvinists. And just so that you get a little bit of a picture on both sides. Yes, it's, come down where you believe God's calling you to, but to be able to understand what the bigger arguments are, the bigger discussions in theology or in, interpreting various passages, that you're able to step outside of your own, little circle of friends and get into a bigger issue. This is not about politics. But there was this little thing called a presidential election last week, if any of you followed that. And as I followed along on social media from people in my church, I was just flabbergasted at people that I sit next to in church at the wide um, divergence in their opinions on what had happened. And so, if that's how we see it, in something like an election, we also see that as it relates to God's word, and how do we help our students, look at a bigger picture than maybe what they've already locked into. Yeah, yeah, I can't remember either. I don't think it was who won the election. It was who didn't lose or something like that. Oh, I'm, I'm so glad I live in the United States, although we've had some strange days. Um, Another question I have here is, how do we measure, especially when we're in online? One of the discussions that I oftentimes hear from professors who are teaching in seat, they feel like when they're able to see their students face to face, they're in their classroom, they can really tell if spiritual formation is taking place and that their lives are changed by what they have lectured to them in that classroom. But we don't have that where we necessarily see our students face to face. How do we tell in the online world whether our learners are applying what we're teaching them? Yeah, discussion board, good. Yeah, I think that's, yeah, keep encouraging those older students to engage more. Yeah. I think that's part of what Janet and I have been trying to work hard on with the discussion boards is to get them moved beyond just a yes, I agree with your point, but that they're able to engage better. Yeah, and in some of the assignment comments, especially if the courses you're teaching have something that has a self-assessment kind of a component to it or whatever.
Andrew, I was reading through a doctoral dissertation last week on student interactions in the discussion board, and this particular study showed that the student interaction increased when the students were receiving actionable and meaningful feedback from the instructors. If the instructor was giving feedback in the grading area and also in the discussion board area, those two factors increase participation and even persistence of the students. So it's really a key role of the instructor to know how to give feedback that will inspire students to do more in that discussion board area. And that didn't come necessarily through punitive measures. It was the student feeling as though the instructor understood them, like they had been heard. That was the key word that came out of that particular study, was the students kept asking over and over again, I want to be heard, I want to be understood. And so if they feel like the instructor at least understands their perspective, it seems to really engage the learner in the materials, even if the perspective is alternative to what's being presented in the course materials. As long as they felt like they had a valid voice, it engaged them more with their topic.
Yeah, Randy says here, Janet, that some students are more open to that than others. How would you respond to that?
Right. So the the students that we were talking about in the dissertation area, and what I've noticed with students when I'm engaging in the classroom, is if I have a student who kind of comes out strong and boxing, they feel, maybe you can sense that they're maybe frustrated about something or they're feeling anxious. Even if they come across to me disrespectfully in their communications, which sometimes they can, sound a little bit like they're being disrespectful in their response, I always go to the grace area. I go to grace first and say, hey, we're in this together. I'm a part of your team. So they realize I genuinely care. I'm trying to engage with you in a way that I genuinely care about your success. And so as long as they know I'm not the enemy, you don't have to do battle with me, and I'm not going to battle with you, if we just choose not to take up arms and instead encouraging the student. So when I'm approaching the feedback piece, I try to have some of my feedback include positives. And the other thing that came out of that dissertation study as well was that students who were really strong in the classroom and weren't receiving any corrective feedback, nothing that they could improve on, it was discouraging to them. They disengaged from their classrooms. They just became apathetic and were like, well, I guess I'm not going to learn anything here. I've learned everything I need to. And they just kind of did a flyby for the rest of the course. So it's important for us, for our top tier students as well, to receive something from us in the way of feedback that gives them something formative.
Yeah, it's interesting. From time to time, I'll get a group of students in a class whose responses are, you get several of them in that class that say, I really have no idea how I did in this class. I got an A, but I never got any feedback. And so I don't know if I've learned the material. I don't know how, if I have a competency in this area, because everything just had a nice job A written on it instead of any feedback. And they found that to be discouraging, even though they got an A in the course.
So Tony's making a good point here. Did you notice his comment there, Andrew, where
Yeah.
he says, I had a student who didn't even know he was putting notes on his paper until the end of our course. I've had that experience myself, where the
Yeah, me
students are
too.
not necessarily seeing. So I wonder, Andrew, how that helps us to be able to speak to our student enrollment counselors and the individuals who are servicing the students to be able to say this is where they're going to see their feedback, this is how they're going to use their grade center, this is where they're going to look for a rubric if it's attached. Maybe some training of the representatives to get the students so they understand where those comments are would be a good part of
Yeah.
helping to engage students more. I'm
Yeah,
dragging this conversation a little bit off of the textbook a little bit. You know, the Hendricks, the philosophy. I'm going more to the mechanics of that space that I always get into. So I didn't mean to sidetrack
no,
or hijack your conversation. So
no, that's good. A note to look for the comments and a link. Okay, that's good too. Good, good suggestion there, Randy. Thanks. Okay, let's see. Let's move on to another question here. How do we help our students move from the idea that we just want them to regurgitate knowledge on a test, um, and instead that we want them to apply knowledge to real life? Um, I don't know how many of you remember back to the game, Bible trivia, and the idea of that was, well, who was the fourth king in the northern tribe, and what was his wife's name, or things like that. You're like, okay, it's in there, and every word is important. All scripture is God breathed, but that doesn't really make a difference in how I live my life today or tomorrow. So how do we help our students say, what we're trying to teach them out of God's word, out of the theology, out of, how to interact with people better? How do we help them move that from just a cerebral, I know it and I can check it off that I know it, but so that it lives and breathes in their lives day by day? And by that Christological piece, do you mean that they're trying to use their Old Testament and connect it to the New Testament? Yeah, I like that, Randy. I taught online for another school, a well-known for-profit online school, and in those, I found myself, because the discussion boards were really similar, and then the answers were really similar, that I got into this bad habit of, I would just, for every discussion board question, I would have three kind of standard responses that I would cut and paste and put in. It was not the best pedagogical method to use, but I got into that kind of a habit of doing that, um, versus, now with my Moody students that I do, ask those probing comments, that it's individualized and make them think deeper about it. I think that's really good. Um, Even if they have the right answer, how do I help them make sure that they push beyond that to some kind of an application or transformational realm as well? Yeah, and good questions coming in. I think on that integrating the biblical view of learning applies to ministry, I think, you know, I try to help students look at that and say, how did Jesus teach? In the Teaching the Scriptures course, we have a book that really goes into, various aspects of how Christ taught, so that we're specifically applying that to ministry in that course. Yeah, I think Tony, I think you're asking a good question there as well. How are they using that to be approved there? Yeah, I mean, I think that that's part of what we're trying to do, that we are constantly challenging those students to keep on and, applying it in their real lives. I think that's critical for them. Um, and I hope that, those are some of the things. And, we've talked about it at several different points, whether it's the discussion board or the emails asking them how they're doing, or all those different pieces, I think all help us integrate that biblical view um, into the teaching process, so that they're thinking that through. We model, hey, I've gone through this, so I understand some of the pain that you're going through as you're going through this particular life event, and I want you to know I'm praying for you. Or, again, in the discussion boards or in the announcement at the beginning or middle of the week, there again to talk about how this has been applied in my life. It's not just that I'm teaching this course. I don't just, open this up and start typing something, but, this is why I really believe it. And this is how I see this at work in my life. I think those are also some ways we can model that too. All right, here's another question. How do we demonstrate that we listen well as we teach our students? Again, the majority of our interaction happens typing, back and forth, but how do we demonstrate that we can learn, and where are there some opportunities for us to listen well to our students?
Andrew, just jumping off of our earlier noon session where we were talking to, oh, bye, Tony. Have a great meeting.
All right. Hey, thanks for balancing your life. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that we heard of, yeah, you're welcome, Tony. Take care. One of the things we talked about, Randy, during our lunch hour was about how we take time to get to know our students in the classroom, and I think that that is part of what is the glory of the MDL faculty body. Part of what came out in that session was how much the faculty members, or those who are choosing to teach in the online environment for us, have pastoral backgrounds or have a real heart for the students. They're truly invested in a way that they can't see themselves not doing this. This is so meaningful to them that it wouldn't be an option for them to not do it. So I really think that that's part of, when we're praying for our faculty and we're praying for our students, that passion would be, fan the flame, so to speak, and to borrow Paul's words, fanning the flame of, what's really passionate in our hearts, what God placed in us in the way of our own spiritual giftedness, and making sure that we use that to reach out through the technology to know our students, being careful not to get too close. I will tell you that I had a personal story from teaching where, not at Moody, but at another university, where I got too close to a student and let that student too close into my personal life. And it became, she lived in the same area that I did, and it just became a problem over time. And you're trying to figure out how to balance that and leave the student's heart intact, and yet not having the student too involved in family became kind of a scenario that I think I learned a lot from that. Wanting to be close, but knowing how to keep an arm's length as well. So, yeah.
She's not coming over for Thanksgiving dinner next week?
No. She had come over for a Thanksgiving dinner last year or a couple years ago, but yeah, it's just not something I had known how to balance very well. So it was pretty interesting to do that. But it is important for us, I think, to remember to connect with those students. And the other thing that came out during the noon session too, Andrew, if you recall, they talked a little bit about, I think you brought it up when you said, how do we move from being that, that person who's in front of the student rather than alongside the student?
Yeah.
How do we indicate to the student that we're not in front of them and they're harnessed to us somehow and we're dragging them up some hill? Instead, we've locked arms with them, marching with them side by side. and we'll keep in stride with them, but to never demonstrate to the students that we're going to do more than the student does in the classroom. Like, we're going to come alongside you and I'll match your effort, but I'm not going to drag you up the hill. Um, and so knowing how to inspire the student to increase their step. And I think about this in the context of my own military experience and what it took to kind of get that, get up the hill every day, whether it's on a 15-mile road march or, 3-day long bivouac. We're out doing night games all night long and, literally shooting at each other across the field at night. How do you keep going with the sleep deprivation piece? And that was through intimidation. The method of inspiration was intimidation, but I was a squad leader, and so my thing was I wasn't going to be able to intimidate these folks. I was going to be in a foxhole with them one day, and probably that night. So I needed to be able to maintain them as a friend at the same time as inspiring them to do a little bit more. So.
Yeah, I do. Randy, I do think that some of those little notes to kind of keep encouraging them, and like you've said, that we find those students who, something comes up in the discussion board or in something that they, send in an assignment that you can really tell that they need that encouragement. And I think that happens like that. Yeah, those little prods. It's amazing to me, um, how many people that we interact with who just need some of those. So I can still remember when I moved here to Bloomington Normal to be involved in a parachurch organization. I was the area director for ministry in the high schools and junior highs here. And so as I came in, I was meeting with each of my college leaders, individually just to get to know them. And I'll never forget sitting down with this one leader and, asking her, what kinds of things can I do to help you out? And she teared up and she said, if you could just tell me once a month that I was doing okay, and if that's too much, if you could tell me once a semester that I'm
Mm.
doing okay, I would still enjoy working and serving kids. And I'm thinking, what? What kind of a place am I inheriting that you're crying, asking whether I could at least tell you once a semester that you're doing okay? And yeah, so I think that a lot of those little prods like that um, are there, so can really help out. So
Yeah. Yeah, that was the overriding theme during our noon session, Andrew, was, encourage, encourage, encourage,
yeah.
positive reinforcement. Yeah.
But and I think you mentioned it earlier about the student who was doing all these crazy different things as she's talking to you from the carpool driver's seat. They have a lot of things that are dragging them down, and if we can be there to be that blessing and encouragement, I mean, I think that's really good. Let's see here. How do we help our students that are struggling in our classes, or maybe even they're failing? Are there ways that you see that students are less prepared for coming to Bible school or seminary than they were a decade or a generation ago? Um, I know that they talk about at the Chicago undergrad school, they had to add a course a number of years ago called Church and Its Doctrines because students were no longer able to come into Bible school and ready to take systematic theology 1 and 2. They had to give them this, 30,000 feet flyover Church and Its Doctrines just to get kids up to speed. So I don't know, do you guys see any of that as students are coming in? Again, we teach a variety of courses. So Janet teaches a little different than what Randy does, and I teach kind of, I think I bridge between the two of you guys. Um, what what kinds of things do you see for students as they come in? Yeah, the writing lab has been good. Yep. Somebody at the earlier session talked about how they had to take remedial English when they were uh, starting out in Bible school, and so they've used that to be an encouragement to their students who need that remedial course to say, "Hey, I know what you're doing. How you're feeling. I've been there and done that. Here's some ways you can do that."
I think too that I always I share my e-portfolio with my students at the beginning of the class, and so they get to see, photos of my family and some of my experiences. And I also include in my opening statement, excuse me, I'm going to cough here, students that I've been where they are, that I didn't, I started my education later in life than most people, and I took time away from the classroom for some time. So for the adult learner, I tend to be able to relate a little bit more to that person. Right now I have two ladies in one of my classes that are both in the same age bracket I am. We're coming to school for their bachelor's degree for the first time. So, I mean, and what that does for them to open up the doors of opportunities and the way that they think differently and they think about themselves, and as a result, they think about their creator differently as well when they begin to discover how much more wonderfully made they are than they thought. And so that self-discovery piece, I think, is so important. So opening up their minds to receiving those nuggets along the way. I think one of the most important things that an instructor said to me when I was doing my undergraduate degree was, he said to me, you're better than you think you are. You're better than you know you are. That meant a lot to me to say, oh, so maybe my paradigm here needs to shift a little, rather than what I think about myself. Maybe I should open up my mind to how God thinks about me. And that's what we try to do in that Foundations of Learning course as well, when we try to get them started off. And I know Randy's taught that course too. But it's a good way to help students be encouraged.
Yeah, and that's good too to help them in that new online environment. I also oftentimes will refer them to the SRA to get some additional help there as well. Um, yeah, most of us didn't learn online until we were older. I can still remember when I first started doing some extra work other than just teaching at Moody. There was like nobody around who had done online classwork. And so everybody was kind of new to it, or, all learned on the job how to teach it. And so, yeah, I think when we can help those older students know that, yeah, we've learned it in our adult years as well. And yeah, I think that's very beneficial to them too. I found that a lot with the students who are in the grad school. Many of them are, well, the last course I taught, the average age was like 52 or 53, and most of them hadn't been to school, since they graduated, 20 or 30 years old earlier. And, just to help encourage them, I think through that. Um, One of the things too in that class that I did is I went back to the instructional design team and tried to advocate for the students and just said, hey guys, they've never taken an online course, so they're new to that. We're throwing in the first week a paper that has to be Turabian formatted and have one of those every week. There were just several of those that were like, oh my, if I were that student coming in, what an insurmountable hurdle. And it was no wonder then that we were losing a whole bunch of students who then dropped out of the program just because that initial hurdle was too big. And so, yeah, if we can help, scaffold them through the process so they can learn little bits at a time as they get into taking their online classes, I think that's really good too. And then on page 51 to 53 of this chapter, um, Hendricks talks a little bit about some of the special cases for students. Sometimes we struggle with um, students if we're trying to reinvent the wheel versus trying to help them think it through. Um, let's see here. Another one is, there's the third one is, if we have students who are really highly motivated and they want to keep doing things. And then the second one, back to the middle, is those students who just need extra encouragement. We've talked some about the extra encouragement, but have you had some of the students who have been like really eager and, man, give me more of what you're studying? What do you think? Have you had to deal with any students who are in this world where they think that everybody deserves a trophy, and so you better give them everything they want in the way they want it.
It's very interesting, the dynamic of the classroom when it comes to grading and not developing that face-to-face relationship with the student, and the fear of, if I don't give this student this level of grade, this is what they're expecting. If I don't give them that grade, and again, we're talking about giving rather than them having earned it, what does that do? Um, what does that do to, the temptation is to just, I don't want the argument with the student, so the temptation is to give the AB grade, um, rather than having to argue with the student. And I feel like I can have a better incident of grading with the student if I have a rubric that I can stand on to be able to give
Yeah.
that feedback. And so the rubric piece, I think, setting expectations for the learner helps. Otherwise, they're going through this kind of blindly, not really knowing how to hit the target. They don't even know where the target is. We've kind of just blindfolded them, given them a quiver and a bow, and said, "Well, go for it."
Right.
So they're kind of shooting in the dark. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
good.
don't know. I think when I have students that aren't engaged, I try to find ways to connect with them, to find commonality. And then same thing with students that are like high achievers in the classroom. I often will require a little more of them, Andrew, frankly, when it comes to like bringing in academic sources. So, in other
Hmm.
words, you made a great posting and you referred to course materials, but how about could you go out to the library and show me a couple of sources from the library in your next posting to bring in academic quality, maybe read a dissertation or a master's thesis that's been published, or find something in a peer-reviewed journal article, and encouraging the student then to take that next step. And one of the other things that I'll often do is to, highlight a student who did really well with their discussion board. So I try to find that in the first week or two and say,
Oh,
hey, everybody, jump into Ellen's, discussion board. Look how she, cited her work, and she gave a good, solid response to that. This is an excellent response. So, just jump in, everybody. Let's, continue up our postings just on Ellen's post this week. And then that kind of creates that natural aspiration to, oh, this is what the instructor's looking for. They're looking for this. So, yeah.
yeah, good. Well, good. Well, Randy, thanks so much
Great.
for jumping in and joining us. I'm sorry you weren't able to figure out the mic. We would have loved to have heard you talking as well. But boy, it's been a joy just to be able to spend some time here with you and see some of the great things that you're able to do as you encourage your students and as you continue to help them out. So it's a real joy to have you here. And I think that wraps everything up here for tonight. And we'll look forward to seeing you next month. So hope you have a great rest of your evening, great Thanksgiving. Yeah, we enjoy having you teach here
All right.
for us too.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right. Good night,
Good night,
Randy.
Randy. Tell Teresa I said hi. Let's turn off the recording.